So Lisa and I were talking beforehand, and she was going, "Oh, I watched one of these podcasts, or a couple of them, and everybody's like telling their heart story, and they're crying." And she goes, "I don't want to do that." I said, "Don't worry, you will."
You bring out that in us.
Well, it's part of just hearing the story, right? I mean, things are very personal to people in their lives, and when you revisit some of those things, and it maybe has been a while, yeah, you can get those kind of reactions.
Yeah, we don't often mull over our life events that got us here, except at a time like this. And then you think, oh, wow.
I know, right? It's like, oh, I did do all this stuff, and that's how I got here. And it was quite
The
a
good,
journey.
the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, and that's what it takes, right? I mean, this is...
It did, yes.
Yeah, right? I can only imagine. Well, anybody that still rides motorcycles, right?
And a horse, if I still had one.
Did you ride in today on your motorcycle to Tucson?
I wish.
Yeah.
No. I slept all the way here. I was so tired. I've got like 3 deadlines that I'm dealing with at the same time. And we just got in the car and I went to sleep and we woke up in Tucson. I woke up in Tucson. I hope George wasn't that tired.
And said, I've got to do my podcast with Mark. And you're doing an opening tonight,
I'm
right?
glad we came early yesterday.
Yeah.
Or I would have, as usual, come in with my hair on fire and going, am I late? Am I late? Of course I'm late.
Yeah. No, you're on time. Perfectly on time.
But if you get here a day early.
Yeah, it does. And so, I should ask, did you bring us any new work?
I did.
Nice.
One is for the rodeo show, which I'm real excited
Oh,
about.
is
I
it?
love your theme shows because it really gets the juices flowing in a direction maybe it wouldn't have.
Yes.
And you start thinking about things that maybe you wouldn't have quite included before,
Right.
but you think if he wants it, I will do it.
And it seemed like a perfect one, I thought, for you. Was
It could be.
the rodeo. So that painting is in here? You have it?
I brought vintage cowgirl boots with a vintage photo of a cowgirl wearing those
very
boots,
cool.
all dressed up for the rodeo with her horse.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic.
So,
all right,
that's
we'll put that as the intro to this podcast. Then.
The other 2 will be a surprise.
Oh, nice. Oh, well, I'm excited. Yeah, they're starting to slowly come in, the different paintings and things, and sculptures as well. So that's exciting. Though we try not to talk about things that are just happening now because I want these podcasts to live on for eternity. But the reality is this is a cool show we're going to have in February. So all on rodeo stuff. So, I've been, I know, right? There's going to be all sorts of stuff from modern to, straight up very tight, so it's the whole gamut.
It's funny. People do things for a theme like this and you think, I would have never thought of that. How did they think? And they look at mine and go, how did you come up with that? So
I've been thinking about it for a few years, actually.
Oh.
And it's because I live with rodeo paintings in my own home. I've got, like an Ed Mel, jackknife kind of stuff.
Yes.
And an Armin Hansen of that, that's of a rodeo from Salinas from the 20s, those kind of things. And Maynard Dixon stuff. So it's just,
Did you have horses?
I never had horses, but I've always liked rodeo. I've gone to the National Rodeo Finals a few times.
Well, if you've had a horse, you've had your own rodeo to some extent. And so I think that's my connection to rodeo.
No, I was
like, oh, yeah, that happened to me once.
I was totally into it as a kid, but my parents were like, no. So I
You
guess.
could have been a bull rider.
No. I would never have been a rodeo guy like that because we had that where I grew up in New Mexico in Portales. And those guys are like just crazy, insane to get on those things.
Oh, I think you have to be.
Yeah. But you look at somebody like Howard Post who did that. He's just the quietest, most, gentle human being. But, he got on all those bulls and everything else.
Yeah, he probably had the poop kicked out
Well,
of
he
him
was,
enough.
well, the
that you
thing.
quiet down after.
Yeah. Well, and he also realized, okay, hey, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do the painting. And that saved his body probably. Because it's a tough, you do, especially if you do bulls. And he said when he got to the professional level, which he did, and he got on a couple of those bulls, that was like, no, those are a different kind of bull. Oh. So those are the bull that try to kill you.
Well, we say that you have to be crazy to do it, but I suppose they think an astronaut that gets in a rocket ship and assumes he's going to land on the moon and come back, that takes a different kind of crazy.
Yeah, they're a cowboy.
I guess we're all here to test our limits.
Yeah, I mean, some tests more than others. I understand that component because I love speed. I love that kind of stuff. I could see doing that,
And you've taken some chances in your life.
A few.
Too.
Yeah, you have to. I mean,
and it seems like they work out.
Sometimes,
Well,
not always. Sometimes not.
well, I only hear about the ones that work out well.
Yeah, nobody wants to talk about the ones so much that
No, and that's
didn't.
what you want to make us do.
But we are, yeah. So, I've represented you for, do you know how long? I don't know, but it's a long time. I was going to say like 20 years.
Well, let's say Charles was a small child in the car the day we met.
Yeah, so he's 30, so yeah, 20 plus years. Yeah, so a very long time. And I don't know the whole backstory, so I'm actually really excited to kind of do this podcast because I get to find out stuff that, I haven't had to get to find out. I mean, we talk, you come in, you bring in paintings, we talk, but we don't talk.
We've never had a beer and
No.
talked over our lives.
Yeah, no, but we're going to. I don't have the beer here, but we'll talk about the other. So where'd you grow up? Where was it?
Basically Long Beach. I was born in La Jolla, the artist community of La Jolla, I
Uh-huh.
like to say. And maybe some of that rubbed off because
Probably.
my parents both were wannabe artists.
Really?
And I have no idea where it came from. But I remember growing up in my grandparents' apartment was a big pastel painting of a jaguar on a tree branch, which was pretty scary to me. But my mother had done that piece of art. Only piece of art I ever know that she had done up to that point. And I looked at it my whole growing up years, knowing that my mother did that. And my dad, I guess, wanted to be an artist. I have no idea where that came from, but I guess that's how they got together. And
Through
it
art?
took them-
They came through together because of art?
No, it was World War II, and my dad had come home. They used to call it shell-shocked,
Oh, wow.
and was on the beach in Long Beach. And my mom's family.
Where did he serve in the World War II? Do you know?
Well, he did his whole stint in the South Pacific, and he ended up on Fiji, and he picked up this island. I don't know if you would call it mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And his whole life, my mother always said if he could live in an orange crate on the beach, he would. He would run around in a grass skirt barefoot. And he ended up living on a sailboat at the end of his life. And that just always stayed with him. So when he and my mom met him on the beach, and I'm kind of the reason they got together. And of course, he had to knuckle down then and put on a shirt and tie and go to work for Ford Motor Company.
And that was in Long Beach?
Mm-hmm. But that was always his hidden side, was that he would just as soon have been an islander, and run around, lived on fish. And eventually, when I got out of high school, they were able to go into art full time. They
Really?
did welded metal sculpture.
Together?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
My dad bought my mom a torch, and she had seen some jewelry. She said, I bet I could make jewelry. My mother decorated our whole house. She would have crocheted the carpet if she could have figured out how to do that. I mean, walls, drapes, pull-up shades, beaded flowers and pods, and made fish stencils for the bathroom and everything. She just was a total art and crafter.
Yeah, creative
And-
person.
Yes. And I don't know where that came from. And she tried to get my grandma into it so they'd have their craft days together, her mom. And because of my dad's love of the South Pacific, they did our house in grass cloth floors. We had ballet dancer lamps. Our couch was some sort of weird turquoise and, not turquoise, chartreuse and black, like something out of an old
Yeah.
movie about Hawaii. And my mother would draw big Ming trees. She'd paint the wall red and do a pastel portrait of a Ming tree that covered the whole wall. My dad would put South Pacific fishing hats,
Yeah.
and he began to wrap fishing poles
Yeah.
with colored twine and different designs for coastal, sea fishing.
Yeah. His fishing.
Casting rods.
Yeah, he would go fishing, but he made his own rods.
Mhm.
Yeah, but
And did
with color,
beautiful
yeah.
artwork on them. And
Yeah.
so they'd hang those up when he wasn't fishing. They'd
Right.
hang those up on the wall. So that was sort of my first art exposure, was the way we were living in our little tiny duplex. But when they finally went into this full time, he'd given her this torch, and as a surprise, and she saw it and she was appalled. It was like a 5-foot tall tank,
Right.
and masks.
Yes.
And she went, I wanted a little tiny torch to make jewelry.
Yeah.
So she was really upset. She said, you use it then. And he went, okay, I'll figure out what to do with it. And he started making like bonsai trees
Oh, yeah.
and fountains. And then he got into welded copper and bronze African animals. And my mom thought, well, if you can do that, I can do it too.
Right.
And so they both began doing it. They started doing street shows. They got picked up by Gumps. Twice a year,
Wow.
they'd drive up to Gumps and wholesale all their work for the past 6 months, and go home and start over again. Bought a van, traveled around to these shows, and eventually they rented the house out that I grew up in, and they moved into a warehouse. And they showered in a garden hose and cooked on a hot plate and lived this
Bohemian life.
Bohemian artist life that my dad had always dreamed of. And they had a ball for several years.
And also
doing that.
sold art.
One made a living at
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
That's amazing.
And my dad didn't have to wear a shirt and tie anymore. And they really had a good time.
How old were they when they kind of made
I
that
was
move?
just getting out of high school. So
They were
40s.
young enough. Yeah, they were young
Yeah, they
enough.
were in their 40s.
And so did they do that for like 20 or 30 years?
No, we had a bunch of family issues. One, my grandmother got really sick with cancer and moved in with them, and everybody gave up everything and devoted almost a year of their lives.
Yeah.
My mother promised her she'd never
Yeah.
put her anywhere
Yeah.
where other people would take care of her. And by then, the whole art market had changed, and my father wanted to do sculpture, which he had done, like wax heads and put shoe polish on them and mounted them on boards and made the frame, and my mom would paint around them. And I mean, they just tried everything. And he wanted to get into cast bronze sculpture, which was in the 80s, was coming into,
Vogue.
Yeah, big time. And Western art was going crazy, and he wanted to do that. And my mother said, those are just copies. Those aren't made by hand. And she just put her foot down, and they never did it. And my father ended up, another of his dreams had always been be a truck driver, and he bought a big rig and started driving trucks. So that was sort of the end of the art phase of their life. But it went on for quite a while. And meanwhile, I'd gotten out of high school. And
But
then
before
I
you
got out of college.
before you got out of high school, let's go back to grade school. Were you artsy then? Were you the kind of the
Well, you couldn't live in that
Yeah, that's I would
household
assume, right?
and not be. And I remember at age 2, I picked up a pencil, and I wanted to know. I was born at Scripps Hospital
Yeah, the Scripps Hospital.
in La Jolla. And I said, what does it look like? And my mother said, well, the ocean is right there and people are fishing. And I knew what it looked like from my dad to hold a fishing rod. So I was 2 or 3 years old. And I remember sitting on that grass mat, woven South Pacific floor in my little room. And I drew a pencil drawing of the hospital with my mom waving out the window and my dad casting a reel into the ocean and catching a fish. And we were off and running.
Yeah, so you were very, very...
It started early.
Yeah.
Yeah, and every little girl wants to be a nurse, and then they want to be a ballerina, and then they want to be a teacher, and then they want to be a missionary. But, the art was just the overriding thing behind everything. And then Disney came about right when I was still really young. And all those Disney, yes, but I'm trying to think exactly when we got TV, but Disney program came on Sunday night pretty early on.
Yeah, I remember that.
And in the movies, and the animated Bambi.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. My grandfather would have his shirts laundered, and they'd come back wrapped on a piece of cardboard. And so he would give me all those pieces of cardboard with the top cut out like a shirt collar.
Right. To work on.
Yes, and those were my palettes. We didn't have a lot of money. My mom wanted to be a stay-at-home housewife, and until her art career, that's really all she did. So we were always on a budget, and my dad was always, because he'd changed jobs a few times, it seemed like he was always the first one to get laid off, first round of layoffs. And so we had lots of ups and downs. So I worked on these shirt cardboards, and I had colored pencils, and then turned out when I turned 12, my mom gave me her old oil paint box, which I had never heard about. She dug it out of somewhere with half-used old tubes of oil paint and some beat-up brushes, and she bought a few new ones to go with it. And from that day on, after my homework was done, I sat at my desk in my room and copied, well, I was copying all the Disney things when I was young, but I copied all the covers of Arizona highways, which brings me to my step-grandmother. She married my grandpa when I was pretty young. He was crippled in an accident in Yuma where he jumped off. Every night they'd come home in their Model A cars and jump off this bridge into the river to cool off and then drive home air conditioned.
Right.
And be fresher for dinner. And he did it one night, and a sandbar had moved in, and he was crippled. He had leather braces on his arms and legs and walked with
Did he break his back or something?
Or his neck or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was early on. I mean, way before I came along, I think. And so he and my grandmother had divorced, and he married my step-grandmother, who was a school teacher. She had been raised partly on the San Carlos Apache Reservation. And so, unbeknownst to me...
Was she Apache, or was she a why was she raised there?
She was raised on a ranch in Deming, New Mexico, as I recall. And I have her father's lawyer's bookcase filled with all my Western artifacts. I love that. It's every time I move it, it gets a little flimsier. But somehow she met my grandpa, who I think was in Yuma. I'm not sure how they met, but they both loved music and culture. My grandfather really educated himself and developed a steel salvage business. And so when he married Grandma Catherine, she ended up being the one that would get out of the car and pick all these steel pipes up and load them in the truck, and then off they'd go. And my grandfather had an office up on Signal Hill in Long Beach, and he would broker and sell railroad parts and all sorts of things. So she became real active, and he was so mean to her. We'd often say, "Why does she stay with him?" And she'd say, "I just love him. We sit at night and listen to classical music, and I just love him." And they both loved Arizona and the Southwest. She collected every Arizona Highways magazine from the first one that came out. So they would give or loan them to me, and I would start copying pictures of Monument Valley and Navajos on horses.
Right.
So I had no idea where that was or who these people were, if I would ever even see that part of the world. But that was...
It was an early impression.
It was
You're like 12.
Disney animals, and
12, 13, yeah. And did you win any awards or anything?
Yes, and my mother brokered the sale of some of my paintings.
What awards did you win? And was this in like high school or
well,
middle
in high school,
school?
I won one that was it was a materials scholarship. I think they gave me $60 to help buy some supplies at the college. Which was Long Beach State. And my folks thought they were sending me to the best art school.
Right.
And nobody knew anything about Art Center or Chenard's or anywhere.
You went where it was local, and
I could still live at home. I never got to have the dorm college life, which could have saved my life. I don't know. But it was 7 miles away, and we were on a budget. Yeah. So I
did you know in high school you were going to be that you wanted to go into art?
Yes. Oh, a turning point in my life was, I think I was about 16, and my mother's birthday was the day before mine. And we would, to celebrate our birthday, every year, we would go to the Laguna Art Festival, and we'd go to Tortilla Flats and have Mexican food, and then we'd go to the art festival. That was before they even had the Sawdust Festival. It got even bigger. But somehow, I think the year I turned 16, I didn't want to go with my mom, I guess. And every other year when we could afford it, we'd go to the pageant of the Masters. Yes. And that's when I found out I couldn't see and needed glasses. She kept saying, "Look at the way her hair is going." I'm going, "What hair?" And finally she said, "Here, take these," and gave me her glasses. I went, "Oh, she has hair." And she went, "Oh, dear."
And how old were you, like 16 or so?
I was in high school.
Yeah, God.
Late in high school. So I got glasses, but I need them for distance, not close up, because I was doing artwork. I wrote all my term papers by hand with a ruler and, hand printed everything for you. I didn't have a typewriter, and So I did everything close up, so
And
I
I
never
bet those
noticed.
were perfect. I bet your handwriting was just perfect.
Oh, it was. I perfected it. It was, it was an art in itself.
Yeah, for people who don't know what Lisa does for her artwork, but she does very tight, extremely realistic with their own story, but realistic imagery, often of pots and beadwork and, whatever strikes you, and we'll get into that. But so I'm asking her about the handwriting because I know how tight you are and how perfect your painting is.
Well, and the other thing I did, started really young, coloring books. I was addicted to coloring books. I could go through one in an afternoon and they'd have to get me another one. So I'm a color between the lines kind of girl. And much as I love impressionism and painterliness, it goes against the fiber of my
what you like
being.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you ever think you might be do comics as an illustrator? Yeah, I'm just curious. I mean, you do comic covers.
I did a book as a young girl when I started babysitting. I decided we needed a babysitter's hand guide. I wrote the whole book and illustrated it myself.
Oh, that's fun. Do you still have it?
Oh, I'm sure.
Somewhere.
I think my parents had a flood in the garage, and
was
that was where all my childhood stuff, boink, in the trash.
So that year that you got the glasses, then you said that was kind of an epiphany at that time as far as art?
That might have been the same year that she went to the art show, the actual art show, without me. And we'd gone together every year, and she came home, she said, "You won't believe who I met." And it was Frank Hamilton. I'm not sure he's still with us.
Well, if it's Frank Hamilton that lives in Tucson, that Frank Hamilton?
I don't know. He was a watercolorist at the time.
Yeah, a different person.
But he lived in, I think, Dana Point.
Yes.
Back then. And he was quite a bit older than me, so I don't know. He every year, that's the first place I went, was Frank Hamilton's booth. And he did barns and stone walls. And later on, that's how I really got interested in Andrew Wyeth. He did such a more dark, sophisticated version of Frank Hamilton. Frank's were really clean,
yes,
pristine, and the snow was beautiful, and the buildings were old, and he showed the little nail holes and the cracks in the wood, and I loved that, but it wasn't scary or intimidating, and I just loved his work. And so I figured I would be a watercolorist, and my mother said, "We met Frank Hamilton. He was there with his booth this time." I went, "No way." She said, "But the good part is he's invited you to come to his studio for a lesson." And I think I was 16. I drove to Dana Point. I'm pretty sure that's where he lived. Spent half a day in his studio, and he painted, I think it was a quarter sheet watercolor. He showed me every paint color that he used. He only used Winsor Newton brushes, Winsor Newton paints. Everything was the finest quality. We copied it all down. We went home. My mother bought it all for me. And I was a watercolorist for 32 years. Wow. And I still used almost every color that he told me to use and why to use it. But he did a whole painting of a wharf scene. And he put a little bait house on it, and he named it Lisa's Bait House. I would love to know where that painting is. Of course, there's no way we could afford his paintings. I marveled at his prices back then. I thought, if I ever, achieved that level. And I just want to say, when we walked into the gallery yesterday, we were backlit and carrying loads of painting packets. And Kathleen, your wife, looked up and said, "Hello, welcome to the gallery. Can I help you?" And I said, "Maybe I can help you." And she went, "Oh, it's you." And that moment for me, I suddenly realized I've walked into one of the finest galleries on this planet, and I'm able to give you something that you can use and bless other people with. And that's like...
Yeah, that's what you live for as an artist, is to be able to get it out there.
That's what I waited for all these years, and I've had it for a while. It just takes those moments when you realize, oh my gosh,
this is a real gallery.
I'm giving the Sublette something they need for this fabulous gallery.
You are 100%. And so when you go to college, you already know, okay, I'm going to go into the art. It sounds like your parents were probably very pro you going
absolutely.
into the arts.
But they thought this was the best place they could send me.
Yeah, might have been at that time, I guess.
No.
No.
What a shock.
Yeah.
This was the early 70s.
Yeah.
And you were supposed to paint like Andy Warhol.
Oh, yeah.
You were supposed to streak naked across the campus
Yeah.
and smoke a lot of pot.
Yeah.
And that was going to make you an artist. And I floundered there for 3 years trying to figure out who I was, how I would, and they made us do everything in acrylic so that we didn't have to spend a lot of money on paint. If we wanted to do an oil painting class, we used acrylic. If we wanted to do a watercolor class, we used acrylic. If we did paint theory class, we used acrylic. And acrylic felt like painting with will-hold glue with some tint to it.
And you had been painting both watercolors and oils, I guess, up already.
Yeah, actually, I'd been doing both. And acrylic was like this animal I didn't understand.
Yes.
Didn't know how to, and it's funny, that's what I've ended up doing. I would love to be an oil painter, but so many of my oil painter friends are the ones that have gotten sick.
Yeah.
And I've lost several of them. And if I can make my acrylics look like a rich oil painting.
Yeah, which they do.
Which actually takes longer than doing it with oil paint.
Yes.
So I would really prefer, I do so much blending and glazing and making things disappear into the background. It's much harder with acrylic. So I just had 3 rough years there. And then my mom's brother, my uncle, he was a big deal. He was in with Howard Hughes, and he and some other people started a project called Marina Pacific Towers, I think was the name.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 2 or 3 towers. They're near, not San Pedro.
Somewhere in that area.
Yeah.
On the coast, in L.A., north of L.A., or south of L.A.
Yeah. On the coast. And there was a design group they hired to do all the PR for it, back when people were still doing paintings instead of photography.
Right.
And he got me a job with this company. So I left school, moved to Santa Monica, went to work for this company. Well, then I realized all the people I worked with had gone to Art Center College of Design.
Right.
And they were draftsmen.
Right.
And they knew design theory and how to make something really pop and, be advertisingly correct and make an impact. And so I learned more from them in the year and a half I was there than I did at school. And that was the first time I'd even heard of Art Center. So I learned a lot. And one by one, they all left, and it was just me. Mm-hmm. And they had a night version where they did mechanical drawing for Boeing or somebody up there. And they kind of wanted me to do both. And then they divided into, one moved across town. They had a falling out. And they'd want me over here, and then they'd want me over there. And finally, I woke up one morning, and I knew I had an ulcer. And I just called in. I said, I can't do this anymore. You guys have to find 5 people to replace me.
Right.
My time here is over. I've learned what I needed to learn. And then I moved on to the next phase. And my folks bought me all the supplies I needed and gave me a few months to get all my watercolors together and framed, and I started doing outdoor street shows. And that's how I evolved into that. All over LA. And I realize now we did, we met movie stars, we met the cream of the crop lived on the West Coast. We met everyone. Sure. Beverly Hills, Century City, Newport Beach, San Diego. We did shows everywhere where people hung out and liked our work and talked to us, invited us over to their house for dinner, and big architects.
Right.
And oh my gosh, it was the golden age of street shows. And so I learned a lot about people. And
what kind of subject matter were you doing at that time?
I tried to do a lot of coastal. I love rural things, but I tried to do a lot of kind of based on Frank Hamilton, beachy, shacks and wind and maybe not waves, but, sand, rough ground, seagrass, broken down fences. But there wasn't that much of that left. I mean, beautiful condos were going up everywhere. There wasn't a lot of that left in Southern California. And I should add that, I felt so, I gave Frank Hamilton the credit always for launching my watercolor career. Years later, I was doing a show out at the Death Valley encampment, and we were in the interior show, which wasn't inside, but it was inside a wall. When the wind and the rain came up, you could get under an overhang, and the wind didn't hit your booth quite as hard. And somebody said, didn't you say you knew Frank Hamilton? He's showing his work over there. I went, what? And I went over there and I said, Frank Hamilton? He went, yes. And I said, you don't remember me, but I was in your studio when I was 16 and you did this paint. And he went, oh my gosh, I remember you. Are you visiting? I said, no, I'm
an artist.
You launched my career. I'm an artist. He said, well, where's your work? And I pointed to, my little A-frame stand over there. And he went over and he started to cry.
Oh, yeah.
He said, I started that. And that was, we have those moments. And that was one of them where I realized he thought I was okay.
Yeah.
That he'd done a good thing. So.
Clearly he had. And that stuck. I can still see it sticks today. Yeah. And how long ago was that? That was in the early 70s kind of time frame?
We were doing Death Valley, 70s into the 80s.
Yeah.
Went out there for a long time. And that was when I really switched to Western. I'd married a Western artist. And he sort of ruled out everything that he wanted to do that I couldn't, which was basically cowboys, Indians, landscapes, horses, and I could have what's left. And I thought, I think that leaves still life. And we had started collecting artifacts. Your son, Charles, and I were talking, and once you educate someone to something that they've walked by, looked at, it doesn't resonate, they have no idea what it is, and they're sure they wouldn't be interested. But you start explaining textiles or pottery or a beaded artifact or where that leather came from and why it's formed the way it into a weapon or a beautiful bag, and you educate them, they're hooked.
Yeah.
Education is everything.
Did it bother you when he said, well, I paint all this, but you get, anything else you can have, the leftovers? Was that a problem?
Probably, but he was my mentor. He was older. He'd been to Art Center College of Design, and I learned a lot from him. And I was, whatever he said went. My mother and I were both Leos, born a day apart in July. But I sort of had to sublimate myself to her because she was such a strong personality.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I learned to be a toned down Leo. So I kind of did what people told me to do. So he said that leaves, whatever you can find. And we had these artifacts. And so I sat down and began with my little watercolor pad and began meticulously copying, rendering these artifacts and designing wild, dark, somber, splashy backgrounds for them that would make them come forward with all their detail. And it turned out it was the best thing because Leanin' Tree Card Company came calling. A lot of places found us out in Death Valley. Fable's Museum became part of his collection. And so we got in with Leanin' Tree, and no one else was really doing still life that I can recall at that point. Right. And I found a niche. I have hundreds of images with Leanin' Tree, boots and moccasins and pottery, and people would buy Leanin' Tree cards in the 80s and 90s as art cards and frame them. Right. They never sent them anywhere.
Right.
And so that was a golden age of that too. How I wish I would have had a digital camera and a computer back then. It would have made everything so much easier. But on the other hand, I was in at a time when what we were doing, I just hit several stages at the right time to really feel supported.
They were a big deal. Yeah, they had their own museum. They were up in Colorado. They bought lots of art. I sold them art actually too, and they were killing it with the greeting cards and the different cards.
And I had
they were
pieces
beautiful.
in his museum, and we've had dinner with Ed up in Montana, and I went to his daughter's wedding, Jane's wedding up in Steamboat, and I've had a really interesting life. I did not get to have children for varying reasons. I probably shouldn't have given in to that too. But on the other hand, I've slept in teepees. I've been in a reenactment on the Custer battlefield when Russell Means and AIM showed up, and had a problem with our guys acting out the cavalry end of that. And, I got to have horses and a ride in Montana. And I've had an interesting life, but it's a trade-off. Everything I did, like the issue with my husband. It was a trade-off.
Yeah.
I love him, and I'm learning so much from him, and if he only wants me to paint still life, I'll do that. I feel God has directed my life in so many ways, even when I was doing things I wasn't supposed to. I feel he had a hand in everything that I've done and become, and I think he was saying, you do still life, honey. There's a big market for it, and you won't have a lot of competition, and I'll see that you do really well.
Yeah, and you
with
have.
it. And there's a verse in the Bible that says, they meant it for evil, but God means it for good for you. And I really feel like so many things that have happened, he meant it for good, and it's worked out to my advantage. And so I don't fight things like some people I know do.
Yeah.
It's like I kind of go with the flow, because I think the flow is
the way you're supposed to go. And so you're doing these still lifes, and they're successful, and you get picked up by Leaning Tree, and that's still in the 80s kind of time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And are you starting?
And that's when I moved to Arizona in 81, and that changed everything.
Yeah, and why did you go there? What was it that drew you? Was it those Arizona highways that you had seen?
We were living a few blocks from the ocean. We jogged up and down the beach and, kind of living that lifestyle. But the work, we were more and more Western. And it was the golden age of Western art. It's gone through its phases. And people loved it, even though they didn't know what it was or didn't know, you know, who the Indians were or what tribe that was or anything. So we did okay, but our neighbors didn't understand us, and Long Beach was totally, they didn't get us at all, which is where we were living. And we went to an art show, and a fella said, I know you all are thinking about moving to a Western place. Is Sedona on your list? And we went, yeah. He said, well, I have a house there. I've never lived in it. We've rented it out. It was going to be our retirement home, but we're getting divorced. Would you like to go take a look at it? We went, yeah. Went there. People were renting it. We didn't want to give it away. We said we were checking on it for the owner, so we never even saw the whole house. And ended up making a deal on the house and moved to Sedona. And I was in heaven.
Yeah.
From the moment I set foot here. And my late husband was not. And it was interesting. He learned growing up in the Midwest, the dream of everybody was to go to California.
Right.
And he was into the car culture.
Yes.
And his dream was to go to California. So by going to Art Center, he managed to get to California. And he felt he was where he was supposed to be. But on paper, it looked like we should live in the West if we were going to paint the West. We had to go east to really find the West.
Yeah, like Maynard Dixon.
And he eventually settled in, and you would have never gotten him out of here. But by then, it had taken its toll, and we couldn't stay together. But I knew that I was finally meant to be there. And we thought Sedona is very benign. There's not a lot of culture clash or crime, or
especially
you're
in
very
the early
accepted. 80s. The CA guys lived there.
Yeah.
The CA was founded right down the street at the bar. I felt like I'd come home. He felt like he'd left
what he wanted,
what he thought he'd always wanted. And he was not a happy camper. We had some rough years there, and I finally said, if you want to go back there, you go. I'm never going back there.
Right.
And I had some family issues there that it was just better to be 500 miles away and not be in the middle of what they were doing over there. You had asked earlier about awards and prizes and things. I won that little scholarship, and all through grade school and junior high, you'd get the award, so they'd let you do the showcases in the hallway, and because you were the star artist of the class. And I really think that's a detriment whenever someone says, oh, my child just won this award. I think it's a reinforcement, especially if your family isn't reinforcing me, but I had plenty of that. But I know when I started college, I thought, boy, I hope they're ready for me. I got to do, me and a couple girlfriends got to do a college class in art. A couple times a month, we'd get to go to the college, and they had these little easels set up for us, and we'd have instructors that would help us along. And so I thought I was big deal.
Right.
And I got to that school, and it felt like everyone was about 2 years ahead of me. And then again, they were doing things that I didn't have any interest in, and they were trying to teach us a lot of theory of color and values, and which I thought, I've been painting my whole life. I didn't need to learn that. Well, I should have paid more attention, at least gotten that out of it. But I felt like a fish out of water. Nobody cared that I'd won the Golden Key Award in
Right.
high school or something.
Right.
It meant nothing. And if you give a young artist too much acclamation, I think you think you're the next Picasso and you're going to just be discovered. And back then they were discovering,
Right.
young actresses, and Marilyn Monroe gets discovered. I guess I thought we'd get discovered. I didn't
Right.
realize there was years and years of hard work, a big learning curve.
Yes.
Doing those outdoor street shows, something about people wouldn't do it in the gallery here, I'm sure. But they'll walk up to you on a street corner, when they're in flip-flops and shorts and
And
their
go, "I don't
dog's
like
peeing
that."
on your booth, and they'd go, "That's the ugliest frame
Yeah.
I've ever seen," or
Yeah.
"That red does not, I could never put that in my house." And you go, "Oh, maybe I need to rethink my frames or tone my red down or something." But that 8 years was a fantastic education for what people
Yeah.
really want, because I think of myself as a fine artist, not a commercial artist.
Right.
But if we don't pay attention to what people are loving right then and what they're inviting into their home to live with, maybe for the rest of their life, then we're missing the boat.
Yeah, I mean, you're in the trenches. That's what it does. And the other thing it does, I think, is by being in the trenches and going through that, the people that can't make it through that don't go out the other side. They give up, right? So,
You mean artists?
yeah, I do.
I read a statistic years ago, and it really stunned me. In fact, I was going to look it up again before this, see if it changed, that people who start out thinking they're going to make a career as
Right.
an artist,
Yeah, 1% probably.
it was a little more than that, but not much.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like 8%
Yeah.
or 6.5% or something amazing. And grown men that I knew that were really good at what they did ended up, managing a company or
Sure.
or taking a job, and they had families to support. But my husband never gave me a penny. Everything that I ever got, did, or paid for half of, I had to earn it.
Yes.
And so my entire life, no one has ever taken care of me. A lot of women artists, they have a lot of disadvantages, but they also have maybe financial backup, and they always know they can. Sometimes, not always.
Yeah. Doesn't sound like you had much.
No, I had none, but I didn't have children,
Yeah.
and that would have
I
been.
don't care. You still
that
had.
would have been.
You still had
huge.
you. You still have all.
Oh,
the
and
other
I always
stuff.
had dogs, and once we got to Arizona, dogs, horses, and pickup trucks.
Yeah, exactly.
So I had a lot to support and pay for. And I'm just amazed when I look back. I ended up buying a little studio 11 years ago, and I've paid it off.
Yeah.
I'm really amazed myself. But
Did you find it hard being a woman artist? Do you think there was things that
glad you asked.
Yeah, the things that you found barriers for entry into galleries and different exhibits and shows and things? If you didn't put Lisa Danielle, but just put L. Danielle, might not have been there as much.
I knew people doing it, and I considered it, but the answer to all that is no, because somewhere along the way I got into the Women Artists of the American West. It
Right.
was, and it was called WOW back
Mhm.
then. And there were, I think, 135 members. And I got in, and we put on a couple shows, and I looked around, and a lot of the work just was not up to par. Museums would allow us to put on a show, and I'd look around and I'd think, this is not museum quality. And so they made me president.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else wanted to be. And I
Right.
guess they thought I was cute enough I could do it, but I became a good delegator. I am not a leader. And they kept me there for 5 years. So I looked everything over, and every year they had like I guess we hadn't had a jurying process. There was a process where everybody paid their $35 or whatever it is, and you were a member, instantly a member. And I looked over everybody's portfolios, and I said, you know what? They go, oh, well, we're women. No one buys our work because we're women. Well, And I'd put my work toe to toe, with my husband's for years. And if my work was better, they bought mine. And I said, you know what? It's not about what sex you are. It's about the quality of your work. And that's what he totally instilled in me. He'd been to one of the major art schools in Chicago before he came to Art Center. And he was just a stickler for quality. He introduced me to, not personally, but Fetchin and Wyeth and all these artists I had never heard of. They wouldn't talk about that in the college I went to. So he really gave me my art education. And I knew what good art was and what it should be. And I said, the only way we're going to make it in this group is if we set up a jurying process and you get the best women artists. I mean, Bettina Steinke was, knocking them dead out there, and Beryl Goodnight and Sandy Scott. And a lot of gals were doing really well. And so it obviously wasn't about sex. I said, we need to have a core of 30 to 50 really good artists, and then have someone give us some shows and see what we can do. And so I felt like I transformed that group from being victims into being a successful group. They're still going today, and I see their ads, and they have really good people and really nice work. And I'm just so tickled, because what we accomplish in life is not based on the sex we came out as. And I guess I wanted to be a tomboy, and I guess there's boys that wish they could be a girl and get taken care of or something. I don't know. But I don't think accomplishment and merit, I think that far succeeds what sex you are. So I'm glad you asked that question, because that's my little crusade, is to not be a victim. And I was a victim for many years in certain ways. And every New Year's I would say, I don't have any resolutions except this year. Don't be a victim. You are not a victim. You're victorious.
Though it seems like you, at least, you entertained putting Danielle instead of Lisa Danielle.
I did.
And why was that?
And maybe just making it Daniel. There was an option. Just because some other women at the time were doing it, because it seemed like it was a man's world. But in many ways, a lot of men didn't make it as a full-time artist because they had families and big responsibilities, mortgages, car payments, bunch of children. And you just are being married to an artist. I saw our income was so erratic.
Right.
And mine still is. I've created my own backup now, so I don't sweat it when we go through things. But I still get nervous, and I learned that you don't, just because you have one big paycheck, you don't go out and buy a boat or a new car. You just don't. And so I'm really frugal, and that has stood me.
Yeah, I think that comes with being an artist to some extent.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to, because you don't have...
You don't get a raise. No.
Might get a decrease, actually.
Oh, yeah. There's some years, when I look at my taxes, I go, oh, that wasn't a good year. But, we don't get a paid vacation. We don't get a paid day off.
Right.
We don't get a 401k that someone's putting half the money in for us. I have never taken a penny from the government. And that's why I guess I'm a conservative, and I can't afford to pay everybody else's bills. But I've figured out a way to take care of my own without having to use other people. And I guess I feel that's what Americans originally did. They were self-sufficient, took care of themselves.
I think most of them still do that.
I hope.
And especially in the art world, they all have to. I don't have any artists that I know of that, had a golden spoon that they got to.
Oh, and there's no insurance.
Yeah, nothing.
There's no.
If you can't paint, you don't eat. That's it.
Well, and if your paintings don't get sold.
That's right. You're dependent, for the most part, not always, but a lot, on artists or museums art galleries or museums to sell your work. And if they don't do it, you're like, oh, no food.
And my partner was very against galleries, and I was trying to do galleries because I thought someday maybe I'll have a child and I'll have to stay home and put him in school, and I won't be able to travel all over the country and sleep in a teepee and fire a Sharps rifle. And he said, well, if that happens, I'll probably find someone who still can. So I was very nervous about the possibility I might become a mom. So it didn't happen. But
Sounds like
if
there's
it
some
had,
angst still there, though.
well, we make choices.
Yeah.
It's everything's a trade-off. I wouldn't have had the life and the education I'd had. And I have friends that have children that are just driving them crazy. And if not the child, the grandchild,
Yeah.
is just wreaking havoc in their lives right now, between drugs and car wrecks and, all sorts of things. And for me, it's pretty smooth sailing. I almost feel guilty sometimes. But that's a trade-off.
No,
and
it's
then
true.
when they have, the Walton family Christmas together, I'm thinking, that could have been me.
Yeah.
But you can't do it all.
No.
A wise woman once said, women can have it all. They just can't have it all at the same time. But I've always had to support myself. So I just figured that's what I better keep doing. So I've been down to, my last $5 and bought something that the dog and I could split, over a couple days till maybe a check would come in. And I don't want to ever go there again. It was a good learning curve. But
see, that's where, the fortitude of going, I'm an artist. This is what I do. This is how I make my living. I'm not giving up. I'm not quitting. And I knew it from when I was a little kid because I won all those awards. I know it's in there. It's been there from day one. See, I would disagree with you a little bit on that. I think by winning those things, that it ignites you and it gives you that fortitude when things are tough, that you can, in your back of your mind and your heart, you go, no, I know I'm this person. I've been this person since the day I was born, and other people have seen it, and I know it's there. So, and even when you got to the school in Long Beach and it's not what you thought, or there's people that are 2 years ahead of you in what they're doing, you're still in the back of your mind going, no, I'm still an artist. I'm just not this artist. And you didn't quit, right? You could have quit. You could have done a lot of stuff.
No, I've never quit. I've taken like 3 little part-time jobs now and then. One when I had to take on my own health insurance. I decided I needed health insurance. And I took a Sunday job.
So the other 6 days you work, and on Sunday you work again.
Well, and on Sunday, what I would make on Sunday was exactly what I needed to cover health insurance, which we'd never had before. And I did it for 6 months, and I thought, I've got this. And then I could quit. And after 9/11,
yes.
Oh my gosh, I'd call my gallery and all the gals would answer the phone and then they'd go, oh, it's just the artist.
Hopefully,
and I'd say,
hopefully
what's
we
going
didn't.
on there?
Hopefully we didn't do that.
I don't think I was with you quite back then. That was 22,
Oh yeah.
3, 2.
You probably were
So
close to it.
maybe in the beginning, but it was my local gallery.
Yeah.
And I'd say, is anything happening? I mean, I live in an art tourist town. I'd say, is anything happening? They'd go, no. So 3 weeks of that. And I thought, okay, I have bills and payments. And so I went to work far at the other end of town as I could, driving my pickup truck, working at a senior living center where they weren't allowed to give you tips, but I had to be a food server. And I never even did that as a teenager. That is backbreaking work at 52 or whatever I was.
Yeah.
That was backbreaking. And you couldn't even push a busing cart. You had to carry a
Right.
big 4-foot wide tray.
Right.
And you put all the silverware into the glasses of water that no one had drunk and all the crockery and carry it
Yep.
back to the kitchen. And I got home one night and I opened the truck door. I went to step out and I literally just fell down into the gravel. And I thought,
Oh my God.
I don't know how long I can do this for $7 an hour. And a couple of days later, I got a phone call and my partner said, I think you can quit your job. I went, why? He said, they just sold 3 paintings at the gallery. And it was the first art that had been sold in months. And I thought, you know how frugal I am. I went, no, not yet. And then I was coming up on a deadline for a show that was actually maybe going to happen. I thought, okay, I need the time. So I gave my notice and quit. But I met a lot of young gals that were raising a child as a single parent. they were living at their parents, or if their parents were mad at them for what they'd gotten themselves into, they were sleeping in their car with their child,
Right.
working for less than $10 an hour, hoping to put themselves through nursing school
Right.
and raise their child. And I saw that and I thought, man, I've had it easy. So life has been an interesting journey. But I needed to see that. I needed to see that.
To go that far down. Yeah.
And to see how far other people were down and the sacrifices they were making for who they were supposed to be or needed to be. And I'd love to see people that excel at what they do and just cowgirl up